Hello and welcome. I'm Dr. Nicola and you are watching Aspen Talks Health, where we discuss alternative healing modalities and how to show up more compassionately in life. And exactly on that point is why I introduced this wonderful guest, Shelli Senterfitt. She is a family lawyer turned psychotherapist because she enjoyed so much the pleasure of having her clients be able to divorce kindly and then co-parent well. So welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm very happy that you're here.
I'm glad to be here.
What's a very typical issue that your clients face?
Yeah, so I see pretty much three categories of clients. So sometimes it's individuals and couples who are thinking about getting divorced. They're not sure, can this relationship be saved? And so a typical issue there would be trying to discern whether they have the desire and the commitment to really work to repair their marriage.
Nice.
A second category of clients would be those who are in the midst of it, really in the thick of oftentimes a difficult, high conflict divorce.
Yeah.
That tends to be more individuals who are coming to me to say, help me manage this stress. You know,
Right.
How can I get through this incredibly painful litigation without, completely losing my mind or losing my job and becoming a person I don't want to be. And then the third category of people are folks who are on the other side of it. So both individuals and couples who have gotten divorced and now they're realizing we've had some bumps in the road. Maybe we're not really sure how to co-parent in this new world post-divorce, and we need some help in navigating, how we can really do right by our kids,
Right.
even though we're not married any longer.
Yeah, that's a very important one.
It is.
So, when the divorce is actually obvious, how do you know? Or when has it gone too far? Are there markers? Can you tell, like, this is not reversible?
Yeah. I usually tell folks that, in my view, just about every relationship can be repaired and rehabilitated. The exceptions to that would be where there is untreated addiction, serious mental health issues, or domestic violence. Because if those issues aren't being addressed, then it's really not a safe or healthy relationship for folks to be in.
Right.
But barring those situations, I think that any relationship can be repaired if, and this is a big one, if both partners are really committed to doing some hard work.
Right.
Even where there's been infidelity, where there's been serious betrayals, you can get past that if you do the work.
Yes.
And so where I would say, it's really too late is when one or both people just doesn't really have the fire in the belly, to do the work. Because I always say, it's hard. You're going to have to dig in. You're going to have to make some serious changes. So do you have the will, to make that happen?
Nice to hear that trust can be rebuilt, because that's, for me, I trust more often than not until you prove you're not trustworthy. And then once that line is crossed, it's really hard for me to reverse. So, but nice, if there's both sides really willing to make the effort, I can see that help.
Yeah, there has to be an openness, right?
Yeah.
So if you said, I'm sorry, that line is crossed, I don't see any way to get back to where we were before. There doesn't matter what my partner might do from this point forward, I am not open to it. Well, then
Done.
There's nothing you can do,
Yeah.
right? But on the other hand, if your partner is saying, I really am so remorseful, I hate it that I caused you this harm, what can I do to earn your trust? Within reason, then
Right.
y'all can navigate that and say, okay, these are the things that would make me feel better, and give your partner a chance to see whether she or he can do those things.
Right. Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah.
Yeah. If the divorce is imminent, how do you control your mental state? Because it's so easy to get angry and upset and hurt and all the emotions, and then you behave not exactly how you want to show up. So how do you stay grounded?
It's a big one, right?
Yeah.
Because this is, for most people, I would say, going through a divorce is one of the most difficult life experiences. Second only maybe to the death of a loved one, but in some ways it is a death, right? It's a death of this relationship that was probably really important to you. So this is where I really turn to a mindfulness practice. I'm a huge proponent of a regular meditation practice for a couple of reasons. One, the research is just very clear that it helps us to regulate our emotional state. It helps us to manage anxiety and depression, and really just become more thoughtful, more present in our lives, as opposed to being reactive, which is what happens for so many folks going through a divorce. So that's something that I talk to all my clients about is, what do you know about mindfulness? Are you open to learning more? And let's see if we can establish a practice to see if it'll support you through this time. And then related to that, of course, and I know I'm biased because I'm in the field, but is having a therapist.
Yeah.
I'm always surprised by how many people want to try to manage their emotional state on their own while they're going through this incredibly difficult time.
Yeah.
And I oftentimes will say to folks, if you were to get some horrible disease like cancer, God forbid, you probably would not say, well, I'll figure that out. I'll see what maybe will work or not work. You're going to go to the oncologist, right? And you're going to find out what your treatment options are and then figure out what feels right for you. A divorce, in some ways, is just as calamitous as getting a terrible, physical health diagnosis. So it's so important that you have a professional who can support you through that process.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's got to bring up some serious deep wounds and triggers of childhood and all sorts of things that you definitely need help guiding through.
Right.
What are some mindfulness tricks? Is there anything that you can share?
Well, I guess I would certainly say having a daily practice of any length is the most important thing. Yes. There was one study that found that meditating for as little as 2 minutes each day can rewire your brain.
Wonderful.
Now, we can all find 2 minutes, right?
Yeah.
That study found the optimal amount of time was 12 minutes. But even if you can't find 12, and I'll be the first to admit, there are some days when life just gets ahead of me and I realize it's time to go to bed and I haven't meditated.
Right.
I will set the timer for 2 minutes and connect to my breath, ground myself into the present moment. Usually what happens is I don't want to stop after 2 minutes, once you get going.
Yeah.
So just figuring out what time of day is going to work best for you is what I usually advise clients to do. But the other thing is we don't have to necessarily be sitting on a meditation cushion with our eyes closed in order to be mindful. Right. We can be mindful when we're stuck in traffic at the S-curve, right? We can tune into our breath, take a pause, observe what's around us, really grounding ourselves, using all of our senses to that present moment. Yeah. And it really can send that message to your nervous system that all is well.
Yes.
We're not trying to, outrun the tiger, which is what happens when our heart starts racing and we get dysregulated.
Right.
So it's something that really, it's a tool that's with us always.
Yeah, it's true. It's just remembering to do it.
That's right, which is why a daily practice is so important, because as you do it on a day-to-day basis, it then becomes much more natural to slip into that mindful moment when you're sitting in traffic.
I think making it part of, absolutely. I think incorporating it throughout your day is essential. Mm-hmm. Incorporating it into part of your morning routine, it makes it more automatic because you brush your teeth, you have your system and you're going to sit there for 10 minutes, 12 minutes.
Right. That's right.
Yeah.
It also, for me at least, it sets the tone for my day.
Exactly.
I love it when I get into a good rhythm of really beginning my day with just even 5 minutes, 10 minutes.
It's true.
Because you then are starting from that place of feeling centered and calm, as opposed to feeling harried and, behind the 8 ball.
Right, and you get to choose how you want to show up that day.
That's right.
I like to end my meditation with, what's my choice today? Mm-hmm. Switching gears a little bit, how do you deal with angry emails? Again, do you go back to that breath or any other?
For sure. I mean,
tips?
One of the things that a mindfulness practice teaches us is to pause, right? Not to react, but to wait a moment, notice what's going on, and then decide how you want to intelligently respond. Right. So I usually suggest to all of my clients that if you get an angry email from your spouse, and you feel like you have to respond right away, save it to your drafts folder. Or if you just have to hit send it to yourself. But wait at least until the next day to make sure that you're saying what actually is important to be said, as opposed to just whatever gets churned up inside of you in that moment.
It also gives space for a little perspective of understanding where the other person is coming from.
That's right.
And what the hurt is, or what the need is from the other person's versus just the attack.
That's right.
Right?
That's lovely if people can tap into some compassion for their spouse. In the midst of a divorce, I have to say that's often a tall order to fill.
I hear you.
But at a minimum, if you wait, there's very few things that are truly an emergency. And so if they are, you ought to be picking up the phone and calling, not sending an email or texting, right?
Advice.
So pretty much anything that you get via text or email can wait. Certainly several hours, probably 24 hours. And I always tell folks, get out of this expectation that our culture seems to have created, that just because we have the internet in our pocket, with our smartphones, that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to respond to everything right away.
Surprisingly difficult.
It is, because I think so many others around us are succumbing to that expectation. But it's really important in a divorce that you not respond to that angry email right away. You're probably going to say something that you'll regret, and then it'll just, build on one angry email to the next.
This builds on this next question builds on exactly this point, but how do you separate without causing harm?
Do you mean to yourself or to kids or both?
Let's start with to your spouse and then to your kids. We'll move on to the kids.
So the hardest part, I think, for to not give in to harming your spouse is realizing it's not going to do you any good, right? So when I was practicing law, I used to tell clients, just don't do anything that is going to make your spouse mad. And they would look at me like I was crazy because they're like, we're getting divorced. We're really mad at each other.
Right.
So that there certainly is hurt. There's deep emotional feelings and wounds that have happened to get you to this point. But you do have choices from this point forward about whether you're going to do things to try and, dig the knife in a little deeper or not.
Right.
And so as hard as it is, what is in your best interest, and certainly in terms of your spouse's interest, is to make the choice of doing less harm rather than more. And again, I go back to that mindfulness practice because that requires taking a little bit of a pause and being intentional about how you want to show up when you're divorcing, as opposed to being reactive.
Yeah. You bring up a good point, how divorce can actually cause harm to yourself, and that might be through the feelings of guilt, of leaving the person and separating. Now they're alone. I suffered that when I wasn't divorcing, but I was separating from my ex, and I, for a year, tortured myself thinking that I had just really destroyed him emotionally and from his heart, and I think what I understand now is that having the perspective that you're doing the person a favor if you're not there 100% in the most loving capacity that you can. You're taking them away from someone that could be that perfect partner for them. So maybe short term there's pain, but long term there's benefit.
And even if you're not the person who's initiating the end of the relationship, you're the one who's feeling really, really wronged. Ultimately, holding on to that is only going to hurt you.
True.
It's not going to hurt the other person. And so I think a lot of people feel like, well, if I let go of this anger, then it's somehow condoning what she or he did, or, I don't want to let him off the hook. But really, you're letting yourself off the hook if you can release that anger. Again, much easier said than done.
I was just about to say, how do you do that?
Well, this is where I think a good therapist comes in, right?
Yeah.
But I think even if we can just express the intention that this is what we want to do, even if we're not able to ultimately do it in every moment, we're at least trying to head in that direction.
Yeah.
And so when people come to me and say, I want to, consciously uncouple, or how can I do this in the least harmful way, I always say you've got to start with yourself and get yourself in that good place where you're not going to be holding on to that anger any more than you must in that moment.
Yeah, makes sense. To see how it possibly could have served you is an interesting technique that I've learned recently.
Yes.
How is the relationship, how is even the bad parts of the relationship in service to your soul? And if you can find that answer, that's so key sometimes.
Yeah. I mean, life presents us opportunities to learn from.
Exactly.
As sometimes they're really painful, hard opportunities.
Yeah.
But I do believe that that there is a lot that we can all learn, even when a relationship comes to an end.
Yeah, so true. Okay, let's switch now to the children because I think this is such a big topic. I know a lot of parents stay together for way longer than they would if there weren't kids involved. And again, if I may add my theory here is that I think it does a disservice to the children. Of course, providing stability for the kids is important, but I think you're also providing what a healthy relationship should look like.
That's right.
And if they're not seeing love and intimacy and genuine care for each other, how are they expected to then show up that way in the future?
Right. I mean, we're really modeling for our kids how to be in relationship. And the reality of life is that sometimes relationships don't work out. So I think that parents who decide to part ways can really teach their kids a whole lot about resilience and about the fact that sometimes even when two people decide they don't want to stay married, they can still be committed to each other as co-parents. They can still be on the kids' team, even if they're not jointly on their same team any longer. So I'm not a fan of folks who say, well, I think we should just stay together for the kids, because kids are perceptive. You know, they pick up on that when they know that it's not a happy relationship that their parents are in. And is that really the lesson that we want to teach kids? That when they're in a situation that simply, you know, isn't right for them, that they should stay in it? Or do we want to teach them that they can, in a kind way, without doing, you know, additional harm, they can make changes and still be all right?
Yeah. Is there a too young age? I want to get this myth out altogether. You know, a lot of parents want to wait till they're 18 or at least no.
There's no good age. It's hard no matter when you decide to part ways. I mean, I've had some clients who said, well, I think it was good that my kids were really little because they never remembered when mommy and daddy lived together, right? All they ever knew was that I have two houses, you know. These days I'm at mommy's and these days I'm at daddy's. And so that may work for some families. I've had other parents who felt like it was better to wait till their kids were older, you know, more established in their routines, better able to process it, and also just be apart from each parent, because it is hard for little bitties to be, you know, away from their parents for a long period of time, from either parent. So there's no magical answer for when is the right time. I think it really comes down to what's going on in your relationship. And if the two of you have gotten to the place of recognizing this really isn't going to work, then I think that's the time. And you'll hopefully do it in a way that's putting the children's interests ahead of your own. Again, easier said than done, but that is the key, I think, to an amicable divorce, for where those parents are able to say, all right, this feels awful for me, but I know it's the right thing for my kid. And so I'm going to be an adult here and I'm going to do this thing. Yeah.
How do you co-parent well?
Well, I think one of the key pieces is what not to do. So let me just start with that. Because if I could leave divorcing parents with only one piece of advice, it's you cannot, under any circumstance, say anything negative about the other parent in the presence of your child.
Wow.
Again, hard for people sometimes to do when they themselves get activated. But kids know that they're a product of both of their parents. And so they know that there's some ways in which they're more like one parent, and other ways they're more like the other. If they hear one parent bad-mouthing the other, then they might start thinking, oh, well, maybe, you know, mommy doesn't like this part of me because I know I'm more like daddy in this way. And let me also just say, I'm talking about mommy and daddy, but I also just want to acknowledge that, of course, there's families come in all shapes and sizes. And so there can be two mommies or two daddies or you know, any configuration, but that is probably what I work with more often, are different sex couples. So, you know, talking badly about the other parent might feel good in the moment, but it can be really damaging to a child long term. And I see families where that's happened. It can be really hard to you can't unring that bell. You know, once a kid has heard you saying, gosh, your other parent is terrible for this reason or that sticks with them. So that's the one thing I always start whenever a divorcing couple comes to me with, saying this is just my absolute rule. You cannot do that. So the flip side of the things you can do are really to maintain that goodwill, to not do anything that upsets the other so that you can work together.
Yeah.
Because the reality is, you get divorced, you have this parenting plan, this document that says the kids are going to be with this parent on these days and the other parent on those days. But you can't anticipate every possibility. You're going to have some times when you need to switch the schedule, right? If the two of y'all are not, on good speaking terms, then you're not going to be able to make those adjustments. And ultimately, it's the kids that suffer. So really staying in a good place with one another is probably, one of the most critical things to co-parenting.
Is there a schedule that's more effective, 1 week on, 1 week off? I know there's 5 and 2, and it can get really complicated.
Yeah.
And I would almost think that shuffling the kids around that much is more damaging than 1 week on, one week off. I don't know, but
every kid's different.
Really?
So parents ask me this all the time. Like,
Okay.
what's the best schedule?
Yeah.
And I always say, what's going to be best for your kids? I don't know that because every kid is different. So for kids that have a really hard time with transitions,
Yes.
then the 2-2-5 schedule is really tough. So that's where kids are with one parent every Monday, Tuesday, the other parent every Wednesday, Thursday, and then they alternate weekends, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So in any given week, the kid is with one parent for 2 days, the other parent for 5 days.
Yeah.
And then the next week it flip-flops. It's a lot to keep up with, although Google Calendars make it easy, right? We can map all that out, recurring events.
True.
So if a kid really can't handle transitions, then that's going to be more difficult than doing a week on, week off schedule.
Okay.
In my ideal world with a divorcing parent, I really love for them to try out whatever schedule they think is going to be best for their children. I like for them to try it out before they finalize the divorce, because otherwise it's just pure speculation. No one has a crystal ball. And so if you don't ever try it out and you just put in the agreement, let's just say the 2-2-5 schedule, and then it turns out to be a nightmare, well, then you're going to have to go back to court and modify it unless the two of you can just mutually agree we're going to do something different.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've heard that if the mother gets a majority of the custody, the kid is there a majority of the time, then the kid comes home from school and just goes to his bedroom, is on his phone doing his homework, and there's not so much interaction versus if a father only has a weekend, it's like we've got a whole schedule and the father wants to do everything with the kid, and so and then there's a disappointment on the father's end when the kid just wants to go to his bed and be on his phone. Yeah. So how do you manage the expectations on both ends?
So this is why I'm really a fan of both parents having both weekday time with their children and weekend time. So if you only have your kid on the weekend, then of course it is easier to say, okay, sometimes we used to call them the Disney dads, right?
Yes.
The dads who want to just come in and do all the fun things.
Right.
That's not real life. Parenting is about homework and bedtime and routine,
right,
and sometimes some discipline, right, in addition to the fun stuff that we can do on the weekends. So I think it's really important for both parents to have opportunities to parent in the school week time as well as the weekend time.
That makes sense. Yeah.
But I'm not a fan of kids going to their room and just playing on their phones regardless, right? These phones are really, I know that's just an aside, but I will say I think that we're only beginning to have some awareness about the damage that the phones are doing really for all of us, but particularly for little developing brains, right? One study showed that that kids who spend a lot of time online are not developing empathy because they're not interacting with real life human beings who are expressing real live emotions. And so I'm a fan of limiting the online use for grown-ups and kids for that reason.
I've heard that they're not getting the face-to-face
maternal gaze.
Yes, so they're actually not able to recognize facial expressions and then get the natural cues that are not spoken.
Yeah.
So they're really losing a communication skill.
I think we're going to only know in the future when we have the data, right, to really study it, just the damage that has been done by these phones.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and the need for the reassurance from all the likes, and if they don't get that, my goodness, and the negative comments. Any other tips for parents and co-parenting well, or Anything else that you want to share?
Well, I think they have to have good communication skills. And again, a lot of my clients sort of look at me like I'm crazy when I say that, because they're like, if we had good communication skills, we might still be married.
Right.
And you know, it's never too late to learn those communication skills. So I've had a lot of divorcing parents who've said to me, gosh, if only we had come sooner, we might not be getting divorced, because
Wow.
this would have helped us to work through some areas of conflict. So that's, again, where I think a skilled professional can help divorcing parents learn better ways of communicating.
Right.
You know, when we don't communicate, we create stories in our heads. We usually fill in the gaps with generally negative information,
Yes.
like the worst case scenario. And so learning to check in with one another to say, you know, what's going on here? Because this seems curious to me, as opposed to creating an internal narrative
Yeah.
about what must be going on here and then acting from that place.
So true. Absolutely true. That's key to relationship 101.
That's right.
It's
sure.
true, because the stories we create are fascinating.
Yeah.
And they're often negative. You're absolutely right. And if you just had the
Yeah.
moment to ask, not blame, not
That's right.
accuse, ask.
Yeah.
It really helps. It makes a
really
difference.
does.
Is there anything else that you'd like to share with the community?
Well, I guess
I think we've tapped on
I think
everything.
we've talked about everything. I know you had mentioned maybe giving people some homework that they
Yes,
might reflect
please,
on,
that's
and
right.
so that maybe is the place
Let's
to
finalize
leave it. So on the subject of communication skills, you know, I think it's useful sometimes to just reflect on our own communication styles. Whether we're in a relationship or not, maybe it's communication with a family member or friend or even a coworker. But I'd like to invite viewers to just think back on a difficult conversation that you may have had recently, and think about whether there's anything you might have done differently now that you have the benefit of hindsight, now that you're not actually in that moment where you may be a little triggered. Is there anything that you might want to change if you could go back in time? And if there is, it's never too late to go back to that person and say, gosh, you know, I really made a poor choice of words there. I'm sorry about that. Would have been a better way to express myself.
Yeah.
And then from that, I think it's useful to say, okay, going forward, here's how I want to show up when I communicate,
Love it.
right? Here's what I learned from recognizing that wasn't the most productive or the healthiest way to show up, so that we can be intentional about how we communicate with others.
Amazing. You know, and just doing that opens up that vulnerability and being open and honest. And it doesn't matter how the other person responds. Oftentimes
right.
it's just for you. It's a
For
self-forgiveness. And then sharing how you want to show up really opens the door for the other person to do so as well.
You know, we can only control ourselves or how we show up. We can't control others.
Right.
But it's amazing when we change what's going on with us,
Right.
what that does open the door to
Absolutely.
with others.
So true. Shelli, it's been such a pleasure. Thank you so much for being on the show.
So happy to be here.
Yeah, thank you. You guys check out aspentalkshealth.com. You'll find all of Shelli's contact information. She's obviously a very qualified psychotherapist, and she will help you through some challenging times for sure. Thank you for tuning in.